without further ado, let's just get the program started. So coming up first, we have Jonathan Murray. He's at Time Warner, and I asked him, tell me about his hobbies, and he said he gave up the time he was going to spend putting together his quadcopter in his hotel room to come give this talk. So he's making sacrifices for Cloud Foundry. Go do it.
Very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, James, and the Cloud Foundry team for pulling this together. It's a pleasure to be here and have this opportunity to share at least one company's journey and the commitment that we made to Cloud Foundry, which was now over just about 2 years ago that we made the decision to make a long-term commitment to Cloud Foundry. And I want to explain a little bit in terms of the lessons we've learned and the journey we've taken over that period of time. I do, before I want to get started, give a shout out to my friend and colleague Dave McCrory, who heads up engineering. And of course, I can't mention Dave without mentioning his beautiful wife, Carolyn, at Cloud of Caroline, who's sitting over there. And Dave leads engineering, and a slight correction, Andrew, we sort of represent Warner Music Group, which originally was part of Time Warner, but is now an independently, privately held. It's the third largest recorded music company in the world. We operate in 40 countries around the world. We have about 5,000 staff, $3 billion in revenue, and we're privately held. And that's actually one of the things that's enabled us to be quite radical about how we think about technology over the last couple of years, because having a private owner who is very committed to a digital-based service model and a CEO who understands the role that technology plays is the great starting point to actually fund some of the stuff that we're doing. So we're in a very fortunate position. The genesis of the vision that we're now putting into practice goes back to the earliest days of my career writing Fortran code on TOPS 10 PDP systems, and then writing trunk network planning applications in VS Fortran on IBM 360s for British Telecom, and then running the global accounts business for Microsoft, managing the complex environments of our top 40 commercial customers. And all the way through that history, it's sort of been a growing realization and a growing question mark as to how long can the complexity that currently overwhelms IT organizations continue. Every generation of technology that we have deployed as IT professionals has not replaced the technology before, it has built on top of it. And it's created more complexity every time we've adjusted. So we went from mainframes to mini computers, we added those to the mainframe environment. Then we deployed client server. Then we got into the web, right? And our IT environments just became increasingly complex. And you end up with software development life cycles like the one that James showed, where the time that's spent on integrating technology in the organization gets in the way of delivering value to the organization. So the challenge I've been thinking about, and the real genesis of the vision we're now implementing goes back to about literally 10 years ago. I can remember exactly the situation I was in, where we were at the time where the light bulb went off for me. I had a team of mine from Microsoft. We were in Chile, and we were visiting a company called Codelco. And Codelco are, for those of you who, I'm a geologist by training, so I like companies that are in the natural resources business, but Codelco is the largest copper mining company in the world. They represent 40% of the Chilean GDP, one company, right? So they're pretty important to the economy. And we were visiting this mine, we were getting a tour, we were underground, and we were sort of a set of Microsoft folks, and we were wandering around. There were a set of Japanese visitors past us going in the opposite direction, and I asked my host, who are the Japanese visitors? And my host said, oh, those are researchers from NTT. And they're basically researching the optimization of photonic networks in noisy industrial environments. To have a mining engineer tell me that there was a research team from NTT inside their mine was sort of a pretty insightful thing. And then you start to realize that they were actually putting telemetry in all of the mining equipment. And not only were they putting telemetry in the mining equipment, but they were remotely controlling the mining equipment. And in fact, they took us to a control center 2 miles away from the mine, where they had mine operators who were sitting in jump seats with joysticks, remotely operating the mining equipment in the mine. And at that point in time, that's when the light bulb went off for me, which is, if you can deploy and transform a business with technology that's as basic as mining copper, what can you do with other businesses with technology? How far can you take the automation of a business? And how radically can we use IT to transform those businesses? And some of you may have read, I wrote a piece just recently on what I call the composable enterprise, this concept of building enterprises out of building blocks, enabling them through IT, and creating organizational models that have the adaptability that we need for today's global, dynamic, economic environments in which we operate. And that was the genesis of the idea that we're now putting into software inside Warner Music Group, which is how radical can you reimagine IT inside the organization? Because the reality is that the speed with which organizations can change, they can adapt to new markets, they can create new products, is in very large part limited by the speed with which we can deploy new capability in IT. It's a real roadblock to value creation inside most organizations. And this is why. Because of that complexity that we've built up over multiple generations of implementing different layers of technology inside our organizations. I mean, the joke of deploying SAP inside your organization, right, is that it's pouring cement into the organization. Well, pretty much all of the IT we've done for the last 40 years is pouring cement into the organization. Once it's in, it's incredibly difficult to change it. It's incredibly difficult to deliver new value and to do that quickly and with low friction at the speed with which the business needs to operate, which causes friction for the IT organization because the CIO is either typically measured by the cost of running their operations or the delivery of value to the organization. And neither of those equations are working out very well for most IT organizations. And the reality is that from an architectural perspective, this is how we've built IT systems inside the enterprise over the last 40 years. Everybody has built whatever the new system is in the way that they wanted to build it. There's been no overall architectural plan. The light switches are all different, the plumbing's all different, the antenna are all in a different place in the roof. There's no standards, right? And when you want to layer something new on top of that, you spend more of your budget doing systems integration work than delivering value to the organization. This is the way we should be delivering IT to the organization. Building apartment blocks where there are common shared services. Those common shared services are shared across all of the requirements of the organization. Yes, if you are a business unit, you get to pick the color of the shades, the paint color on the wall, which TV you want in the room, what functionality you want in your living room. But you're plugging into a common service framework. And that's the model that we're sort of thinking through and sort of building out in our organization today. Because ultimately, we need IT, and I swear to God that I did not know that the pivotal tagline was moving at the speed of business, right? That's a complete coincidence. But we do need to get IT to move to the point where IT can deliver value at the speed of the business. And at the same time, deliver IT and new services at lower operational cost than we're typically able to deliver it today. And while we're at it, let's build a platform that enables organizations to innovate, to experiment at low cost, to build fast fail cycles. One of the challenges inside most organizations today is that the cost of experimentation for the business, you want to build a new consumer service and you want to see, you want to do A/B testing, you want to do 3 or 4 different scenarios and you want to see which one works. The cost of building each of those services is too expensive. So we don't experiment very much. And if you don't experiment very much and it's too costly, then you don't learn very much. So we want to build an environment where experimentation is cheap, you can do it rapidly, you can learn from it, And you can basically converge on what the right answers are for each piece of the business that's doing the experimentation. And then ultimately, I have a firm belief that over the next few years, the single metric that all CIOs, most CIOs will be measured against is time to value. It doesn't matter whether your IT budget is going up year over year. If your IT budget has gone up 10%, but you're delivering 100% more value to the business, that's a good return on investment. And a lot of IT organizations are starting to realize that actually the answer to the problem of a year-over-year forced decline in your operating costs is to deliver more value. Because nobody's going to question the spend on IT if the return on that investment outweighs by an order of magnitude the spend. So I really think the focus, and certainly the focus for us, is time to value. How quickly can new capability be delivered to the organization that enables the organization to evolve, deliver new businesses, create more revenue, build better consumer products, et cetera, et cetera. There is a revolution coming. And I use the revolution in the political sense of the replacement of a pre-existing regime or pre-existing structural system. We live in a world where corporate IT, in pretty much all companies, looks the same. It's been built on that build upon build upon build. It's like an architecture and like an archaeological dig in most IT organizations. You can go through the different layers of history and sort of find all the artifacts. Still operating, still working. There is a revolution coming. And that revolution implies something that's going to be very difficult for many organizations to take on board. And I realize that. We're in a very fortunate position. The realization is that at some point, backward compatibility is no longer something you can afford. That building on the past is no longer something you can afford. At some point, the cost of building on the past, of dealing with that complexity, of dealing with that friction, means that you have to make the jump to a blank sheet of paper. And that's the decision we made 18 months ago. My organization has 40 years of IT legacy, just like any organization of our size and complexity. But we made the decision that we weren't going to rewire that. We were going to start with a blank sheet of paper. We were going to build the future. And then we would figure out how to re-implement what we have over here on this new world that we're building for the future of the company. Making that break is the revolution. And it's going to be tough. And until I realize this, we've built a software business over the last 18 months. Very talented people like Dave leading engineering. A lot of companies are not going to be able to do that. So those of you who are service providers, those of you who are partners with Pivotal, are going to be the people that essentially put this in a box. We had to custom build it, but in 5 or 10 years' time, you'll buy it off the shelf. And when you can buy it off the shelf and you can drop it into an organization, you will de-risk the decision for the customer. And the pent-up demand for the trillions of dollars that are going to pivot over the next, and sorry, I shouldn't use that term. Unintended, no pun intended. The trillions of dollars of enterprise IT applications that have been built for the last 40 or 50 years, a large chunk of that is going to evolve to a new world. It's going to get refreshed over the next 10 years, and somebody's going to earn that money. That's the opportunity. So what are we doing? We're building an IT service factory. And I know that using the words factory in an audience full of code jocks is a really dodgy thing to do, right? Because we're all in the craft business, right? We like crafting software. Well, guess what? Organizations don't give a rat's ass about craft, right? What they care about is delivery. And there are I have two very distinct models of code development inside my organization. We have craft, which is the deep, deep, deep highly technical engineering work that's required to customize Cloud Foundry, to build an operating system, to build the deployment infrastructure, etc. That's craft. But that's an investment we're making. That platform has to become a factory. Because when the business says, you know what, I need a new service for this business channel that I'm just about to open out, and they want it in 3 months, not in 3 years, it better be a factory that you have to turn that out. Because that's not the place for craft. That's the place for high-velocity, factory-based delivery of software to the organization and capability to the organization. So we're focused on moving from separate silos, because we have a classic IT organization that I inherited when I joined. We're moving from silos to a single platform. That platform is Cloud Foundry-based. We're moving from a systems focus. All the people in IT today that get up every day and worry about their system and the unique systems interaction with the business, evolving those people to think about business engagement, value to the business, not patching the latest version of Red Hat, right? Delivering value to the business. Moving from a break-fix environment. I pay millions of dollars a year to outsourced vendors who do break-fix engineering from me. I don't want to spend that money on break-fix engineering. I want to spend that money on new capability delivery, right? And continuous improvement. Building an environment where we just get better every day instead of just trying to tread water and stop ourselves from drowning. And finally, maintaining the past, which is what we've been doing for years, to enabling the future. Making investments that help us see a future that's much brighter than it is today, instead of just spending all of our money maintaining the systems that we have. Our strategy really our implementation strategy really breaks out into 4 major components. Decouple from infrastructure, which is I really, 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 really do not care what infrastructure I'm running on. I don't want to care about servers. I don't want to care about VMs. I don't want to care about instances. I don't want to care about the level of the operating system. I don't want to care about the hypervisor. That is unimportant. What I care about is delivering applications and capability to the business. That's what I want to spend my time. If you're in the infrastructure business and you're a service provider, you want to care about that stuff. As a customer, I don't want to care about that stuff. I don't want to have to ever care about that stuff. So we're building an architecture. We've built an architecture that is completely decoupled from the underlying infrastructure. So I build once, those applications run in my platform environment, and I can run that platform environment on any infrastructure I choose, whether it's OpenStack, AWS, Rackspace, whatever. It doesn't matter. Making data a service. The central lifeblood of an organization is data. And yet data is probably the most complex thing in the world to deal with inside most IT organizations, because we plumbed it in different ways, in different databases, using different bus technologies over years and years and years, and we spend all of our money trying to glue that data together and making it available to developers. We need to get out of that business. All data needs to be consumed by a standard service interface, both in and out. No exceptions. None of this point-to-point shit that we're doing today, right? Decomposing applications. Applications are developed historically as big monolithic piles of code. Those things need to get decomposed into a set of agile, recomposable components. And then automating everything. So I'm going to touch on each one of those in a little bit more detail. So decoupling the infrastructure. We build to PaaS, so we were a very early adopter of Cloud Foundry for that specific reason. We build our architecture today to avoid any dependencies on the underlying infrastructure as a service, and we abstract through the use of BOSH. So basically allowing us to apply our application layer and above on basically any infrastructure. When we think about data, this is what, I'm a classic, I grew up started in mainframe development, so did all my third normal form stuff, right? Got trained as a DBA. I've been through the whole evolution of the technology stack in the enterprise, And it took me months, and Dave will attest to this, to be convinced that we didn't need a standard DBMS in the middle of this architecture. And we don't. So our architecture today has no SQL database in it. We haven't found a use case yet that requires one. Across all of the use cases for an enterprise company, we haven't found a use case that requires us to put a copy of Oracle, a copy of SQL Server, a copy of MySQL, Postgres, anything inside our architecture. That's pretty radical. As I said, it took me a while to get my brain around that concept, but so far, and look, we're not a bank. We don't do high-volume transaction processing systems, so I get that. That's a niche. That's a specialized sort of environment. But we do transaction processing. It's not just very high volume. But we put the transaction processing semantics into the service, not into the database. Stored procedures need to be strangled at birth. It just does not make any sense to put business logic inside the damn database, right? So put the semantics. If you've built a service architecture, a data service layer, data service architecture, put the semantics for transactions in that layer. We run a polyglot storage architecture, right? Once you've got that data services layer, right? It doesn't matter if you start with Cassandra, you want to add Elasticsearch, well, you just change the semantics in the service calls, in the service architecture. You want to add a graph database? No problem. You just add it in and you change the semantics, right? You give yourself a huge amount of flexibility in terms of how you deal with data. One of the things we learned was that you do not need to, we learned this painfully, by the way, that you do not need to do classic master data management approaches. You know, the old master data management approach where you buy an MDM solution and you stick it in the middle of your architecture and it becomes the in and out and the transformation of all of the rules and all that sort of stuff, we actually tried that and it was a disaster, right? Simplicity is what rules the day. Take that shit out, put those semantics in the data access layer, right? Build very lightweight ETL solutions on top of your service layer. Don't put a honking big MDM solution in the middle of your architecture. And migrate data on demand. I mean, we're running the business on 40 years of IT legacy, so there's a bunch of data that's sitting there, which any new system that we build will need to get access to. And the old approach was, well, when we do the SDLC and the waterfall design and what have you, there's a part in that design process where we're going to migrate all the data, we're going to cleanse it, we're going to move it over, and we're going to pay millions of dollars to do that. That is such a dumb way to deal with data inside the organization. What you should do, which is sort of the architecture we're building today, is when a user actually needs the data, you've built a smart enough architecture that it gets it from the old environment, cleanses it on demand, brings it into your new environment, makes that the master system of record, master data of record, and then basically you build from there. So do it on demand. It's a very radically different way of thinking about than we've done before. So I won't speak for anybody else, but just the way we've done systems before. Decompose applications. We aim for velocity. So our number one goal is time to value. How quickly can we get code, new capability into the hands of the business? We understand that in doing that, we're doing multiple things in flight at the same time that we're going to have to rework. So we plan for it. We assume that we're going to rework as part of our architecture. We want to minimize the code footprint. If I've got 6 different development streams working at the same time on different applications, we let the development stream that's furthest ahead, that requires a core service to design that service so that that we don't impact their velocity. And then as part of the rework and the retrospective, we take that service, we bring it back into the center, we make it part of the architecture, and then we have everybody else use that shared service. So we're always optimizing for the code footprint, for the smallest set of code that we can run the entire business on. We do not want applications building duplicate services because that just expands the complexity of the environment that you're building. Ease of service discovery, using things like Swagger from a development perspective so that when we build services, new developers who are coming on board have very easy access to the service APIs, to the JSON, can prototype, can sort of test the service calls in a very dynamic, very robust environment. And simplifying developer onboarding. This is one of the things, again, through the work that Dave and I have been doing together, this is one of the insights for me. You have to treat the enterprise platform environment just like you would if you were selling a platform outside the company. You have to have a developer program, right? You have to think about onboarding developers who were not part of your design process, right? So make it easy. Build the developer portals. Give them access to the discovery tools. Help them develop very rapid new applications to experiment, to prototype. It's a key part of what we're doing. And then automating everything. Build a culture of test-driven development. Fix it upstream so that you don't have to fix it downstream. Because the further downstream it moves, the more impact it has on velocity and delivering value to the business. So building a culture where developers basically understand how to test, how to build the unit tests for their code, et cetera, is a critically important piece of the puzzle. Implementing continuous integration. That continuous integration inside most enterprise IT organizations is like a foreign concept, right? There is no continuous integration because a lot of IT organizations, I won't say most, but a lot of organizations are still in waterfall design processes. They're not agile or anywhere close to being agile. We have a culture where if you break it, you fix it, right? If you broke the code, if you broke the build, you don't get to check in your code, right? You have to go fix it before you can check it in. And we want to get to a model, and to be very honest, we're not there right today. We will be within the next couple of months of deploying continuously, right? Of building, deploying, and just getting into that discipline of making sure that we are continually deploying capability to the business. So the question is, it all sounds really good, right? It sounds like unicorns and fairy dust. But actually, that's the journey we've been on. That's the reality that we have. Everything that I described to you today is operational inside our organization today. We went from 0. We started engineering on October the 1st last year. And we now have operational line of business capability running on this new operating platform. The velocity of that is quite staggering for somebody who's grown up for 25, 30 years in the enterprise software business. We reduced risk through incubation. So when we went to this model doing this blank sheet of paper, we literally started with a blank sheet of paper. We built a new organization because I wasn't going to find the skills and I wasn't going to find the cultural receptivity in my classical IT organization to go do what we wanted to do. So we built a software business. I hired Dave, we hired a whole bunch of talented people around Dave, and we built what very much looks like a software company. It has product management, it has a software engineering process. It doesn't look like a classical IT organization. So we incubated, we sort of did a startup inside the company, we proved out the technology, we de-risked impacting the operational business, and now we're going to put those two things together because we're now at a level where we're entirely comfortable with the model that we've built and the technology platform that we've implemented. We've built a software and services culture, right? We think, act, operate like a software company that has clients. We think of our business as clients for our software company. We run a product management organization that interacts with line of business leaders as if they're clients in a software development process, in a very agile software development process. We prioritize new capability in order to prove out the model. So we didn't pick off the supply chain system and try and go prove that we could rebuild that. We found some interesting areas of the business where there was latent demand, and we went and built those new things that could both help us build out the appropriate platform, but also prove the model to the business, to validate what we were doing and the level of investment we were making. And then ultimately, we're going to replace the 300 applications that we have. We're not going to migrate them. So we're not on a path to migrate all of that legacy code. We will basically walk through and figure out on a priority basis how to actually replace that with a new generation of applications and services built on top of this new platform. So a few lessons learned. Building an aircraft in flight is hard. You've heard the analogy of changing the engines on the aircraft in flight. That's hard, right? We literally built the aircraft in flight. So we were working with the business, building new line of business capability while we were building the platform underneath. And so the coordination, the synchronization, we're on about our third iteration of Agile, right? Trying to figure that out. None of that's easy. Open source is your friend. If there's some missing capability in our platform today, first place we go look is GitHub, right? We don't go talk to a vendor. We don't go talk to Oracle. We don't go talk to Microsoft. We don't go talk to anybody who wants to charge us a licensing fee. We go look on GitHub and we see which of the projects has the best velocity, has the most people involved, seems to have the highest quality, and then we pick and choose the components that we need from our architecture. The entire architecture we've built over the last, James will hate me saying this because they're trying to sell a platform, but the entire architecture we've built over the last 18 months is entirely open source. We're not paying a licensing fee to anybody.
I love it.
Agile is a mindset, not a process, right? So you have to have a process, and like I said, we're on about our third iteration of the process, but actually it's a way of thinking. And one of the biggest challenges is actually getting people to think in an agile way, whether it's agile or whether it's lean and Kanban, right? It's just a different way of thinking about the world. We're pretty far down the road of the cultural adaptation to things like self-organizing teams. The old Toyota way model of the person working on the factory floor being able to press the red button and stop the production line. That's the culture we want to build. If you see a problem, you highlight the problem, we get everybody who needs to be in a room together, fix the problem, and then we move on. Right? You have to build. That's a very different type of culture for an IT organization. Software companies, lots of software companies get that. Enterprise IT typically doesn't. And then automation is not automatic, right? You really have to work hard because the natural tendency is that when something's broken, that we apply human resource to fix the problem. Instead of actually stepping back for a second and saying, okay, in the future, how would we automate the solution to that problem? We actually patch with human beings, and that's just because that's the fastest, easiest thing to do at the time, instead of doing the deeper thinking to actually figure out what's the long-term automated solution that prevents us from having that problem in the future. So that's another cultural adaptation. We live by this sort of mantra, right? Fail, learn, adapt, repeat. That's the only way this can work, because we didn't get everything right on day one, right? We were taking big risks. The only thing I ask of the team is that we get better as we move forward. And the only way you can do it is by implementing this type of philosophy, which is we're going to fail, but we're going to learn from those failures. We're then going to figure out how to automate our way out of those problems in the future, and then we're going to repeat the process. We're going to do the next thing in the cycle, and we're going to repeat until we get better and better and better and continuously improve as an organization. I hate to do this, but if any of you actually want to come join us climbing these mountains, you're welcome to talk to Dave or myself. We have openings for very talented people. It's probably inappropriate of me to say that, but I have the stage. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much.